good to see your shining faces again. This is Cynthia Keith. She is a native Washingtonian. I don't think I pronounced that correct. Her love of photography started in a journalism class in Walt Whitman High School in Bethesda, Maryland. And over the years has led her to scenic locations from Alaska to Maine in search of landscape images. Her specialty is garden landscape photography, a marriage of her vision for the grand landscape and intimate flower portraits. Cynthia has been a member of North Bethesda Camera Club since 1992, where she has exhibited, participated in numerous presentations, and served on multiple committees. She is certified judge by the Maryland Photography Alliance and a frequent judge at camera clubs in the greater Washington area. Outside of photography, she has a BA in music and an MBA from the University of Maryland and holds the Chartered Financial Analyst designation. Cynthia has worked for several financial firms in the Washington, D.C. area during her career as an investment manager. So if everybody can say hi to Cynthia.
Oh, everybody see that?
Yes.
Good. All right. We'll start with the general category tonight. We have 37 images. I believe we have 5 places and 3 honorable mentions. So we'll start the first one off. Is Autumn in New York, Neil Shapiro.
As we get started, let me just say that all the images tonight are just wonderful, both the monochrome and the general. You all have outdone yourselves again. So it makes my job very difficult. And some of the things you hear me say may be a little nitpicky, but I've got to find some way to get it down to the number of prizes that you allotted. And as we've done before, when I comment on them, I'll be commenting in general 4 areas. One is craftsmanship. That's the technical aspects of exposure, focus, f-stop, etc. The other would be composition. Also creativity, and that's, think of that as looking at something common in an unusual way or using an unusual technique. And finally, in communication, was the photographer trying to express a mood or capture a particular moment or something like that. So those are the 4 general areas that I look at in the images and hopefully we'll touch on. This is a lovely fall scene. I don't know about you guys, but our leaves have not started to turn. They're a little yellow and half of them are falling off. It's been too warm here to get really nice colors so far. But this is a lovely image, and the thing that draws you in is the line of the water. So, you know, our eye goes automatically to the brightest parts of an image and or those that are most saturated. So this line of the water walks us back into the woods and gives it a feeling of depth. Also, the bright yellow leaves that are towards the back of the scene also draw us in. So that gives a great feeling of 3D, if you will. Closer to the front, we have more of the cascade and the leaves on the rocks in the lower right. One of the things about that bright thing directing our eye is sometimes it can lead us out of the picture. So whereas initially our eye goes towards the back here, as we work our way around in it, we come down here, and because this is bright and more saturated in the leaves, ultimately your eye gets stuck down here. And I don't think that's what the intent was for the photographer. He wanted us to see this wonderful deep scene. So perhaps it would be good to try cropping it a little bit more off of the bottom. And maybe it might mean having to lose the yellow leaves there. But I would suggest try that and see if you still get a better feel for the depth.
Okay, next up is Welcome to the Zoo, Doug Mitchell.
How cute, right? And I wish that was a cell phone, because that everybody's got one these days, right? This is just a lovely, calm portrait. Very well done. Everything is tack sharp in the animal, and within you can see the face easily, and the feet, and very appealing. I think here too, watch where your eye goes again to the bright things. And so we've got brightness in the background. So you may want to try in Lightroom or Photoshop, darkening the background some. You could also do that with some of the foreground, the rock, because you really want us to focus on the animal, and the light on that is so nice that you don't want anybody to look at anything else. So maybe even cropping it in some on both sides. There's nothing happening there that's adding to the picture, and really focus us on the animal.
Okay. Next up is Bulb in Boca, Sean Sullivan.
This is an interesting composition and a interesting subject matter as well. The light bulb with the different filaments in it really draws your attention. Again, it's bright. And we've got interesting colors going on as well throughout the image. And then we have the object on the left that looks a little bit like an inverted wine glass or something, with a nice play of the lights bouncing around on that. I think that's really, in this image, maybe there's too much, because you see the light bulb, you see that, and then you go to the lights at the bottom, and it's a little complicated to say what should we be looking at. I think there are a lot of different images in this one image, and hopefully the photographer shot this from lots of different angles and different crops, and maybe just one of the light bulb. Love the ring of light on the left-hand side of the glass there. And then one of this other glass object in the upper left, with all the play of lights in it. So there are lots of interesting things there. I hope you took lots more images of that.
Okay. Next up is The Front Door, Marguerite Hill.
This is fun. The broom laying there by itself without any context really makes the viewer think. And you can make up your own story about what it's doing there and who left it there, and did they finish sweeping? Are they coming back? So it makes the viewer think, which is always great. There's some dichotomies too, because here you see this kind of ratty looking broom, and then you have the nice shiny doorknob. I think maybe to add to the, to keep it simple, you might want to clone out the blue-gray electrical thing on the left there. Not too hard to do in Photoshop these days. And that would really draw us into this question. And there's wonderful light on the top of the door and here down right at the stoop, and maybe play that up a little bit and maybe darken the walls just a hair, so we really enjoy that nice light.
Okay. Next up is Orange Flame, Sharon Silversmith.
This is lovely from a technical standpoint. Look at all the detail in the feathers and the interesting colorations and the little black and white dots. Not to mention the fact that it's sharp, and the eye is very sharp. We have a little bit of a catchlight there. The background is not distracting at all. It's very muted. I wish it had just a hair more depth of field, so that the beak was just a little sharper, and maybe a little more room at the top, so he doesn't feel like he's bumping his head against the ceiling. And perhaps, I don't know if you cropped it down, if you have more room up there, or you could add to the canvas in Photoshop and give him just a little more room. And then the little cleanup of some of the spots in the black of his head, but very, very interesting bird.
Next up, Spooky Times, Claudia Jakubowski.
Appropriate for this month, right? I like the eerie, spooky, foggy feeling. It definitely conveys a mood. The photographer did a great job in that. I think the one thing you might want to think about is adding a little contrast to the lower third, if you will, of the image, so that the darkness and some of the writing on the tombstones that are closest to us become a little more obvious. And that can be done with clarity or maybe a little contrast in either Lightroom or Photoshop. The leaves in the foreground are a little brighter than they need to be. You could darken them down so that what we see is a little more definition in the tombstones, and then still this eerie, foggy feeling.
Okay, next up, Birdhouse, Robert Neer.
Interesting treatment that's been done on this. You can see a canvas-like look and it's most noticeable up in the top, where you see the textures. The simplicity of this is very nice with the birds and just the lone barn in the field. Notice you can't see anything really in the background. It just goes into oblivion. It's very nice treatment by the photographer. I think we don't see the texture in the foreground, and if that was intentional, you did a good job. If you want to see more of the texture in the foreground, then before you apply the texture, you might want to go in and just blur out some of the grasses in the foreground. I know you tried probably to get really good depth of field and keep them sharp, but if you want to give this kind of moody feel to it, then less detail in the foreground, and maybe a little more detail in the barn itself. And the way you can do that is to mask out some of the texture over the top of the barn so that the barn stands out a little bit because it's sharper.
Okay, next up is Ye Old Village Blacksmith, Doug Mitchell.
This image has a nice feel to it. There are a number of things that the photographer has done to give it kind of an old worldy feel. The technique that was applied to the image as a whole makes it look painterly. You can see this especially around the doors. The contrasting color of the blue of the doors with the gold of the leaves is very appealing. And the brightness of the wheel leaning up against the side of the building there is also very nice. And then look at the sky, how that's been darkened, but there is detail or texture or something happening there. It's just not blank. And then it's got a vignette around it to really draw your eye on those blue doors. There is words obviously above the doors, and there's always a debate about should you have words in your picture, because as humans, we try to read the words, but here I think it adds to the context of the image. If there was anything, I think the right-hand side, especially the right corner, is a little brighter. I love the light on that, but you don't want it to be too bright to draw us away from the doors. So you might want to think about darkening that just a hair more in the lower right, or, you know, maybe cropping a little bit there. Try it, see, you may not like it that way. Just something to try.
Next up is The American Eagle, Janet Haywood. Sorry, John.
Well, this is a nice composite, and you know, at first glance, you don't see the flag. And then the more you look at it, oh, okay, yeah, there's an American flag there behind the eagle. So again, a nice treatment, nice texturing, etc., that's going on here, and a good. So once you see the flag, it kind of clicks, and you say, oh, yeah, that's pretty cool. Notice the square shape of it, which really gives it, with the diagonal of the flag, gives it a feeling of solidity. Squares can tend to do that. The only thing I would suggest is, because the texture is also on the bird, look at the bird's face. It's because of the texture that it's a little unsharp. I'm sure the original was sharp. So you may want to just mask out, and it doesn't have to be with a pure black or pure white brush. You can make it kind of gray. Just mask out a little bit around, especially around the eye. It'll really make the eye jump out and capture the viewer's attention.
Okay, next is One Leg to Stand On, Dan Steen.
It's hard to find a picture of a flamingo with two legs. But this is very nicely done. The curve of the neck and the fact that you can see the eye clearly, and the water is blurred out, so it's not obtrusive and gives an impression of moving water, etc. The colors on the shady side of the bird are well done, and it's sharp there. The only problem is it's a little burned out on the back of the bird. And I think you may be able to address some of that in Lightroom, in the HSL sliders, and play with that and try your yellow and your pink, red sliders there. You may be able to bring some detail back in the back. And then on the right-hand side where a few of his tail feathers are cut, the rule, and rules are meant to be broken. But when you have something cropped tight, you either want to make it look like it was all the feathers, or you want to make it look like it was intentional that you cut it. So I would say this is kind of halfway in between. If you have more room, more feather on the right, you might want to show them and take a little off of the left, or crop it in more on the right-hand side. So there's obviously it was the photographer's intent to not show the whole bird.
Okay, next up is A Kiss Stolen, Alan Wiggins.
I like the thought behind this image of the two, the interaction between the two tulips. In the obviously a field of tulips. So notice the choice of f-stop by the photographer to make everything else out of focus except for the subject matter, which is the two flowers in the middle. There's also darkening going on all around except for those two. I would suggest to the photographer, you might want to increase the exposure on those two flowers just a little bit, just to make them pop even more, because they're about the same tonality as a couple of the flowers in the foreground. But you want the viewer to look at them, not at the foreground. So maybe a combination of a little more darkening of the ones in the foreground and a little lightening of those two. And then the one thing that you might want to try to either darken or remove is the vertical stem that's just to the left of the left-hand flower. Because it's a definite shape and it leads you up out of the frame, see what you can do about removing that or darkening it.
Next up is The Otter, Ronald Spear.
This is a good picture of this elusive creature. Sometimes, you see them and by the time you get your camera up to your eye, they've gone underwater. So a very good capture by the photographer here. Notice that except for where he's making waves, the rest of the water is very smooth. There's a lot of noise in the water. It adds to the smoothness, but if you were to hang this on a wall, blow it up or whatever, I think the noise might be a little distracting. You can get rid of some of the noise either in Photoshop or Topaz or any number of plugins these days that do a pretty good job of that. I think you would like it better. The reeds up in the upper left-hand corner unfortunately distract us from this lovely otter. And you may want to try cropping it so that all you see is the otter, or making the reeds go away in Lightroom or Photoshop by cloning them out or brushing them out, so that all we look at is the otter and the motion of him swimming and the ripples in the water.
Okay, next up is Old Meets New, Sharon Silversmith.
I mentioned everybody's got a cell phone in their hand. This is a picture of our times, right? That's an interesting composition because there's a lot of similarity between the two ladies here, both in hats, both with the brims pulled down so you can't see over their face, both engrossed in their electronic devices. The sunglasses laying on the stoop are an nice touch too. I think, it may be, except for her dress, the white dress, maybe just the hair underexposed. Could be a little brighter perhaps, but watch the gravel foreground because we don't want that to be bright. It's nothing happening there. You may want to try and crop a little bit more of the foreground out and so that it doesn't interfere.
Okay, next is With Open Arms, Ronald Spear.
That's a good capture of the bird sunning itself in its environment. It's very much an environmental image. But I think we've got a lot of the environment here and not enough of the bird. Good job of capturing the bird with its wings extended. You don't usually see them like this. The bird is sharp. So why not try and crop it in some? I mean, really tight. Let's just see the bird, its log, and maybe a bit of the water with the reflection in it, and that's it. The grasses are pretty, but they're competing for my attention with the bird. So I think it'd be a great portrait if it was cropped a lot tighter.
Okay, next up is an eagle earns its honor from the storms it endures. Jana Kaywood.
There's also the photographer's done a lot of thinking about how they wanted to create a mood here or send a message with the superimposed lightning and clouds, etc. It's an interesting thought and a good message. I think kind of like in the other eagle shot, we want the head to be pretty sharp. And I think because of some of the texturing and whatnot, the face isn't as sharp as it probably was when you shot it. So you may want to mask a little of that texture off of the face. And you know, sorry, that's my dog. I don't know what she wants. She's been fed. The tree, you may want to take a little of the sharpness down. I mean, we always are trying to make things very sharp, but here we don't want it to compete with the bird. The bird should be the sharpest. Everything else is environmental and adding to the mood and the story. And the tree is drawing me a little bit. And I think if it was less sharp, maybe just a hair darker, that way I would focus on the bird.
Next up is Pretty in Pink, Claudia Jakubowski.
This is a lovely treatment of the flower. Notice the technique that's been used has a number of things going for it. It adds texture or volume to the blossom itself and some interesting textures to the leaves. The background is complementary and not distracting at all. I think you may want to think again about the amount of vignetting in the upper left, because as you can see, the upper left is very, very dark and the lower right is lovely, mottled green and dark. And so it feels a bit off balance because it's so dark up in the top that it tends to tilt the viewer's imagination. So if you can lighten the upper left just a little bit more, maybe to kind of match what's going on in the lower right, I think that'll give the image more balance.
Next up is the Douro River Vineyard, Phil Olivo.
Now, this is an interesting scene that I certainly haven't seen before. I don't know how many of us have, of this vineyard with the vines, obviously nice green, the grasses in the yellow, and then we have this building that's only partially there, and a nice sky, lovely clouds going on. It really makes you stop and think. And the photographer did a good job in shooting this vertical, because you can see it has all sorts of vertical lines going on in it. Being able to see the sky through the windows adds interest and gives you a feeling that, whoa, there's nothing there with that building. So it's very interesting composition. I hope you work this scene a lot. The one thing that kind of distracts is the large bush, which because it's kind of right in the middle. If you'd taken a few steps to the left or to the right, it may have been less obvious. Hopefully you took lots of other images of it, but it's an interesting scene.
Next up is Bridge to Nowhere, Sean Sullivan.
I think there are lots of images in this one photograph as well. But if you look at the exposure, everything is very well exposed and the colors are very realistic. Maybe with the exception of the clouds in the upper left-hand corner, which are a little purple, but that can be addressed. You may have tried to darken them just a little too much. You may want to back it off a little bit. But I know why you would do it, because something bright like that up in the upper left corner would pull the viewer away. As I mentioned, I think there are multiple images here. If you look at the left-hand side of the image and, kind of put your hand over the right half of the image, you have an interesting composition with the train tracks leading back into the woods. You have the lovely color of the leaves reflected in the water. And that's a very interesting and pleasing composition by itself. And then on the right-hand side, if you put your hand on the left-hand side of the image, we have this nice bucolic scene of a puffy cloud and the forest and then the bay or whatever going back in there. But then if you look to the far right, we have these birds. Well, you hardly even notice the birds in this full panel. If you cut the image in half, then you have some of the, your eye pays more attention to the birds. They're a little close to the edge on the right. Wish that they were a little more in. And the white boat or log there on the far right also detracts, so you could darken that up some. But there are multiple things here. I hope if this was a panel, you probably have multiple images. Try pulling out some of the ones within it and have other scenes.
Next up, Southbound, Robert Neer.
This is a very nice treatment of this image. Notice the texture and the coloration, the toning makes it look like an old canvas or watercolor. It's the top, 2/3 of it are really quite lovely. And I think that's where the photographer wants us to look. I think the lower 1/3 is not as lovely and the treatment is not as pronounced. But because it takes up a large volume, it kind of pulls us down and away from the lovely part that's going on in the upper 2/3. So you may want to consider cropping from the bottom up, maybe to just above where currently the leftmost track hits the side of the image, somewhere around there. Play with it and see what you like. You also may want to think about what to do with the orange, I guess, natural gas line signs back there. They try taking them out, see if you like it better. Again, you want the the viewer to look down the tracks into the distance. And I think that'll help. It's nice.
Next up is Scott, Thomas Whitmore.
So, kudos for creativity here. Usually you see the horse looking out of the barn at you. This way you're in the barn and the horse is looking out at somebody else. So very, very creative image, well seen. I think you can see just enough of the horse's eye to see that he is kind of looking out, but also keeping an eye on you perhaps. I wish that the outside was a little less burned out. You can try playing with that in either Lightroom or Photoshop to see if you can tone down the outdoors. May not be possible. I like the warm colors that you've left on the wood inside the barn. I don't know that we need all of the right-hand side. You might want to try cropping that in a little bit. Again, because you don't want these nice saturated colors to detract from the horse.
Next up, Abstract Window Reflection, Linda Tomasulo.
Well seen by the photographer. Kudos for that. In the wavy glass and the resulting reflection, it does have a bit of whimsy to it because of that. The colors are very well done. The reflection, the exposure there is just perfect. There's some things that may detract that you may want to clean up, like the electrical functions there at the bottom, make them go away. And then there's a debate about what to do with the leaves. So this is one of those instances where it's either all or none, probably. You probably would choose to leave them as is, or try and make them all go away. And certainly the ones in the upper left-hand corner would be easy to get rid of. The one in the middle would be a little more difficult because of its intersection with the window itself. Could be done if you're very good at that kind of fine detail work. But we get leaves reflected in the window. So taking the leaves that are in the foreground out would give you a different image. It'd be just a picture of the window as opposed to a picture of the side of the house and the window. So try it. You may like it. You may not. Leave it like this, but it's a fun image.
Next up is Gunsight Butte, Bill Lanahan.
A lovely vantage point to capture the enormity of the scene. The clouds, the sunset or sunrise, nicely done as well. The light on the lower part of this foremost butte really is quite lovely. It's a little underexposed. I think it could be just a hair brighter across the board, maybe not in the water. Again, you can mask it out. And you may want to try to warm it up just a hair to play on some of this light that's hitting the front of the lower part of that butte. If you warm it up just a little bit, it might give a little warmth to the whole image. Notice it looks blue-green, and adding just a little warmth in your tint slider or temperature slider might really bring some of that to life.
Next up is Urban Backpacking, Rich Schreibstein.
This is a fun street scene. There are a lot of threes in here. We have the 3 school children. We have the 3 windows. The photographer did a good job of timing that the girls are separated. You can see each of them. You can see their silhouettes clearly. You've got the clean background of the blank wall, and you have their shadows. I think that there are a few things that could be done to clean it up, maybe eliminating the pipe at the top of the image, again, because it's close to the edge, it tends to pull your eye. You might want to crop it up a little bit from the bottom. The grasses and the curb, doesn't add anything to the image, but that just a couple of things to think about.
Okay. Next up is the Soccer Moment, Alan Wiggins.
Well, it is a good capture of a moment. Notice the intensity of both players on their faces, and you can see their faces clearly. The light on that is very good. Their arms and legs are in motion. The photographer did a good job of choice of shutter speed to stop the action. Yet you've got enough blur in the feet to show that they are moving, if you had any doubt. So it's a very good capture of the 2 players. You might want to tone down and or desaturate some of the folks in the background, especially the gentleman with the red shirt on the right, which competes, again, it's saturated and our eye goes over there to look at him when you want us to look at the players. So if you desaturate them some and maybe darken them a little bit, we'll get the picture that there was a crowd there watching, but we'll really be able to focus on the players.
Next is Fog Over Mill Creek, Helena Kesey.
Again, another foggy, moody scene with a slow shutter speed to blur the water, which is quite lovely. We've got good exposure throughout. You get enough detail in the darker areas to see the leaves and the tree trunks, etc. And I think, the thing that attracts you is probably the fog on the right-hand side. You can make, and the left-hand side is very sharp. Well, if you want to make that a little less sharp, try a little negative dehaze in Lightroom. That will make the left-hand side a little less sharp and maybe imply more of the fogginess there. You also might want to consider darkening the right-hand corner because the grasses and the leaves there aren't nearly as interesting as the rest of the image. So you could darken them, or maybe also cropping up a little bit to just under the last green bush or thing that sticks up there. If you took that part off, I don't think you'd miss anything in the water either.
Okay. Next up is Ivy and Friend, Thomas Whitmore.
also a good moment of the interaction between the horse and the girl. And the exposure is very well done, even though you're inside a barn. It looks like everything is, the darks are, you can still see the detail in the horse's mane, but the rest of the lighter areas, nothing is blown out. You can see her face, she's touching the horse. I wish her eyes were open more so that we could really see her looking at the horse. But the angle of her body and the face and everything is nicely done.
Next up is T-Rex of the bug world, Dan Steen.
Yes, they are. And they are indeed. This is a very nice capture. Notice the head and the forearms are very sharp, literally and figuratively, and that you get a really good look at the eyes of the insect. I think the thing that makes it so nice is the sharpness of the bug. The thing that detracts is the sharpness of the wall, and that even though it's a nice muted color, all the detail in the wall is drawing us away from the bug. So the little cracks and crevices in the wall, etc. If it was more blurred, like the left-hand side of the image, it wouldn't be quite as detracting.
Next up is The Hollow, Bill Lanahan.
Another good street scene. Here again, we have words, but they add to the image, especially in street photography. We've got all sorts of signs going on. We have the two folks with the umbrellas. You see it is raining because of the reflections in the street. The photographer did a good job of not letting the street lights get blown out. And yet you can see detail in the bricks and in the road itself. I think one thing is that pulls you away is the car on the left, and primarily because of its license plate. If it's important to you to have the car or that store that's over there next to it, then you might want to make the license plate go away. Or you could consider cropping it just behind the rear bumper of the car so that you focus us over here. And then similarly, you may want to think about lightening up the two people a little bit so that we do see them over there. It's not an afterthought. Even though they're a little close to the edge on the right, if you brighten them up, it may help.
Okay, the honorable mentions, and a correction, there are 4, not 3. First up, Somewhere in Space, Elena Kesey.
So for the honorable mentions and the award winners, it's hard to find anything to say to improve the images. This is a wonderful concept. Excellent rendition of this light painting with this the ball on a surface, so you get a reflection of the light in the surface as well as in the ball itself, which amplifies the colors. The colors are very appealing. There's motion in the image, even though the ball is static. It's just very nicely done.
Next honorable mention is Autumn Rain, Joe Catronio.
A wonderful macro of this leaf. We don't usually get right down and look at all of the different spots and veins and everything on the leaves. But as you can see here, there's a lot of interesting things going on there. And kudos to the photographer for pointing that out to us.
Next up is Pleated Woodpecker, Joe Catronio.
So a good capture of this bird. Notice the eye and the head are sharp. You've got a little catchlight in the eye. You get a lot of detail in the feathers on his back. And the background is soft. It's not distracting at all. The only thing, if I was going to nitpick on this one, is all of the cut off branches on this log that he's sitting on. And some of them, you might be able to make them disappear and the viewer would never miss it. But it's a nice capture of the bird.
Last honorable mention is Silos by Kim Koza.
I like the concept of this one. I like the pastel in the sky and in the ground. It's very painterly, the technique that's been used here. I like the photographer's choice of a long pano. I think that the two silos on the left were probably added to the image, but that's perfectly fine. But if you don't want me to know that, then watch the shadows on the sides of the silos, which are identical to the ones of the other silos. So if you fudge that a little bit, then no one will ever know.
And our winners, in 5th place, Seattle Abstract 1, Phil Olivo.
Wonderful colors in this, and an abstract is supposed to make you think or wonder, or if you see it, say, hanging on a wall in a gallery, it makes you want to go up and examine it and see exactly what's going on, and that's what happens with this image.
In 4th place, Northern Flow, Neil Shapiro.
A lot of mood in this image, from the blurriness of the water, the choice of shutter speed here, the darkness in the sky and the mist coming off of the water. But you know, you're grounded with the rocks that do appear in here. Very nice mood.
In 3rd place, Humming, Bernie Fabry.
You know, what can you say? This fabulous capture of the birds, the background nicely blown out. There's enough motion in the wings on the one on the left, again, to show the hummingbird, you know, stationary, and then the other one in flight on the right-hand side. The composition is very nice. It's very pleasing.
In 2nd place, Reads and Reflections, Linda Tomasulo.
Another calm scene with the yellows and the blues, very complementary. The reeds in silhouette. Notice you don't see the land, you don't have to. This picture is all about the reeds and the colors in the water.
And in 1st place, Hands by Kim Koza.
A very creative scene. I'm assuming the photographer set this up. And notice everything is perfectly perpendicular. Notice the way it's lit, that you see the angles of the light inside the box, which gives it depth. And then, of course, the sign in the hands facing it. It's very creative, very nicely done.
Very good. Congratulations to our winners, and great images, everybody. Let's move on to Monochrome. There are 30 images. There are 5 places and 2 honorable mentions. First up, Nature's Fury, Neil Shapiro.
Yeah, I'm so glad to see so many monochrome images. In our club, we're afraid that black and white is dying art, and we keep trying to encourage all the members to explore monochrome, and I'm so glad to see you all doing that. Good for you. This also has a mood to it, doesn't it? With the dark applied to the clouds, the very bright of the water, and then still some detail in the foreground. I think, you know, any, you know, rules are meant to be broken, right? But in most black and white images, you want to see white whites, black blacks, and the whole range of tonality throughout. And you have that in this image. The diagonal in the front is pleasing. It's complementary to the diagonals you see in the clouds. There's hard to find something to say that's not good about this image.
Okay, next up is Veiled Vision, Doug Mitchell.
So this one is more muted. Notice we don't have the full range. We don't have a pure white here. We get hints of it in the trees. We have dark vignetting around them. The angle of this tree is interesting. I think if anything, it feels a little left heavy because we don't have the verticals of the trunks from the as much in the middle of the image. Can't do anything about that. That's how it was. But Interesting scene.
Next up is Forgotten Fishing Camp, Robert Neer.
This is an interesting diptych. The of two different images. So on the left-hand side, we have these interesting structures and good light on them. Not much happening in the sky. It's a little subdued. On the right-hand side, the same tonality and a continuation of the image. So I think the image on the left could stand on its own. The image on the right, probably not so much. Now let's pretend like two images are put together. Probably could be a good standalone image with a lot of the right-hand side cropped off, maybe beyond the pier or whatever that wooden structure is, cropped off. That could also perhaps be a standing image. I'm not sure that the diptych does it any favors, as opposed to having just one or the other as a standalone.
Next up is Winter Friends, Johnny Kaywood.
Again, a mood here in the snowstorm. Good choice of shutter speed by the photographer to capture the snowflakes. The bird in the bottom of it, you have a clean view of him. The bird in the upper, it's a shame that that one branch is right over his face. Nothing you can do about that, but it does just takes a little bit away from the image.
Next is Outbuilding, Robert Neer.
A nice feel to this. So this has been a treatment used on it to make it look a bit more painterly, ethereal, if you will, with the infrared look of the grasses. Again, it's got words, but it adds to the image. The border treatment, I'm not sure does anything for me. I think if you cropped it into the inside of the image as the main part of the image already is, that actually looks just fine. And you may want to think about taking more off of the right. I don't think we need to see the rear of the building. There's nothing really happening there. And you could crop that in maybe halfway in the wall, which would really focus us on the door, the window that you can see from the inside, and the tree trunk and the fence on the left, which are really quite lovely.
Okay, next is Trail Ride, Marguerite Hill.
More words, but blurred out, right? I think this image is interesting in that we have this line leading us, but it's not really on the left, it's not really in the middle. And then you really have to look to see what's going on up where the graffiti is, whether it's a train trestle or a pedestrian walk or whatever. It's a little confusing. So I think maybe cropping some off of the right and maybe lightening that structure up there so we can see what it is and why it's there, as opposed to being very dark and kind of hard to distinguish.
Next is Peas and Bees, Elena Kesey.
Well seen abstract by the photographer. Again, we have the geometric shapes, but they're going around a curve. Makes you think, okay, is this a pier or stairs or what is going on here? A nice capture of the water. There's just enough ripples in the water to make you realize it is water, and that it is reflecting the upper half of the image. So it's a nice reflection image as well, with the geometric shapes being repeated in the water. You might want to think about cropping it up to in the right-hand side where you see the last dark vertical line, and think about cropping it to halfway between there and its reflection in the bottom. I think that bottom 20% really doesn't do much for you. And if you crop it there, it's really going to draw the viewer's eye up into the curve, which is the incongruous part of this design.
Okay, next up is Escher's study, Neil Shapiro.
So this is very interesting because it's symmetrical, but it's not. So the more you look at it, in some ways it's like an abstract because, okay, it looks round, everything looks symmetrical, but then when you start to look at the furniture on the lower level, you see it's not quite perfect. You know, here's a chair askew, there's a table at a different angle. So it really makes you think, and it's very interesting because of the ornateness of the balcony there, and then you've got the different windows and the strange stripes on the floor. It really makes you think.
Next is Black and White Waterfall, Dan Steen.
So picking your shutter speed is important when you're doing waterfalls or moving water to convey whatever mood it is. So you can shoot a very fast shutter speed and stop all the droplets, or you can shoot it very slow, as we've seen in some of the other images, and give a milky look to it. And this is kind of halfway in between. And it's really a personal choice by the photographer. I mean, this is very appealing in that you can see more of the detail of the water as well. And the different levels of the cascades are interesting. So it's nicely done.
Next is Free Ride, Alan Wiggins.
This is a good street scene as well. The look on the little girl's face is priceless. She's very cute. She's looking up at her mom, who is helping her out there as they travel. So it really tells a story. It's intimate in that you have such a good view of the little girl. You can't see the mom's face, but you get the picture because the girl is looking right at her. If the girl had been looking off to the left or the right, you wouldn't have gotten as much of the story of the mom helping the girl. There are a couple of things that do detract, and one is the lady just behind the girl with the white mask and the bright area behind her. If that could be toned down or somehow eliminated so that it doesn't pull us away from her face, the girl's face that is. And you may want to lighten up her face just a little bit so that we can see it a little bit better. And then there is a disembodied foot between the girl and her mother that could be made to go away that I don't think you would miss it too much.
Okay, next up is Barbie Massacre, Sean Sullivan.
This is spooky. You know, and this is Halloween spooky kind of stuff, right? Something you would see on a movie they show this time of year. And so if that's what the photographer was trying to convey, they did a good job of it. Notice that it's high contrast. You know, the body of the dolls is extremely bright and shiny, and then the grass as well. So it's a very high key, almost image. And you can't, none of the dolls are really looking at you, and they're kind of randomly thrown around. It's this one makes you think too.
Next up is Glacier Point, Bill Lanahan.
Another nice place to be on an interesting scene. I think the atmospherics weren't your friend that day because it's very hazy in the distance. I don't know if you tried some dehaze on the image to get a little more detail, especially around the waterfalls. That might help, because otherwise our eye goes, number one, to the sky, and there's not a lot happening there. Number two, to the top of the rock on the left, and that's probably not what you want us to really focus on. And then number three, to the just little top of the bush there at the bottom. So the bush we could crop off, and you know, you can probably tone down the left side of the rock, but you really need to give us something to look at in the middle, and that's where that dehaze in the middle where the waterfalls are might help.
Okay, next up is Girl in Old Town, Alan Wiggins.
So this is a a pleasant portrait. You know, she's not looking at the photographer, and that's okay. It makes you think, okay, what is she looking at? But you can, you know, the light on her face is very pleasing, and then on her neck, good angle of the light. You can see both of her eyes clearly. I think a couple of things. Number one, these sunglasses on her head, we might want to see a little bit more of the sunglasses, and you can do that perhaps by lightening them just a little bit. A couple things that would be detracting, and that is there's a white spot from her face at about 10 o'clock off her face there that I think could be gotten rid of because I don't think she's looking at that spot. And that might take away some of the detraction.
Okay, next up is the mimic, Fritz Schreibstein.
Well, this also makes you think, okay, what are these folks doing there and why aren't they looking at the interesting sculpture? They themselves are interesting. Her dress is interesting. I don't know what he's doing with his hands, which makes you think. Again, your eyes go to the brightest parts. So unfortunately, that's the white areas in the pavement, and especially this one down here at the right. You may want to tone them down a little bit. I think they add something to the picture, but they certainly are detracting. And the bright light that's right at the top of the frame, I don't know really what was going on with him, but if you zoom in on it, you'll see that there's a white fringe around him. I don't know if that was done in post-processing. You might want to go back and check your sliders and things to see what you did that created that fringe.
Next up is Roosevelt Island Bridge, Linda Tomasulo.
Lovely infrared image to give you the ghostly leaves and trees. Nice angle, catches the curve of the bridge, the reflection in the water, the tonality there is very nicely done. The sky tonality also very neutral, blends well with the top of the trees. You have some tree branches in the upper right and a row on the upper left, but they're not distracting because they're thin and dark, and your eye goes mostly to the bridge. You really miss seeing the people. You have to, you don't see them for, 2 or 3 seconds, and it's kind of as an afterthought. And that may have been the photographer's intent, but it adds some scale to the image as well.
Next up is Turning Over a New Leaf, Elena Kesey.
Well seen and well executed by the photographer to highlight these leaves in a vertical composition. Notice the background is blurred out, good choice of f-stop, and the tonalities are all very pleasing. Lightening the leaves, whether or not they were that light to begin with, was good, well done in post-processing to really make them stand out.
Next up is Gardenia, Claudia Jakubowski.
Very nice texture in this image too. It's lovely. It gives you detail in the petals that you never really think about. And doing this in black and white helps you see that more, because usually you will look at the rose and it'll be pink or red or white or whatever, and you see the color, and then you see the general pattern of the petals, but you rarely look at the texture in each of them. And doing it in black and white is a wonderful way to bring out that texture. It's nicely composed with the flower more towards the right, and then the line of the leaves on the left. So a very nice treatment of that. The one thing I would say on the far left on the leaf, there where we have a little white on the bottom rung of that leaf, you could make that white area much, much darker because it does tend to pull us just a little bit out of the image. Otherwise, nicely done.
Next up is Feather Detail, Kim Koza.
Well, interesting scene here. Notice the background is solid, but it's textured, and it really makes you think, what in the world is this? Is it a feather? Is it a leaf? Is it some sort of cloth? You really don't know, and that's a good thing for an abstract. The only drawback here, I wish that the one on the upper right wasn't quite as close to the edge. Again, if you've cropped this down, you have some extra room there. You may want to extend it out or extend the canvas just to give you a little more breathing room on the right.
Next up, it's always 420 somewhere, Sean Sullivan.
This is a very textured, interesting image. I mean, you get the texture in the wood behind the clock, but then you get the texture in the face of the clock and making it look like it's old and weather beaten. The tonality of the whole image is fairly dark, which again leads to that old feeling. The only thing I would say, like one of the other images we saw, it feels a little heavy because of the dark area in the lower right. I don't know if there was nothing there or if you toned it down a lot, but it would be best, perhaps, if you could, to lighten that up a little bit so that it's about the same tonality or density as the lower left, so that it feels more balanced.
Next up is Catterskill Falls, Jana Kaywood.
A lovely scene of this falls. The exposure here is done very well, so that you can see detail up under the cliffs there in the rocks and deep into the forest as well. But it's the water is a nice white. There's not much sky because there's not much going on up there, and you don't want it to distract as well. Having just a little bit there above the top waterfall pulls us up to see the higher waterfall, as opposed to concentrating on the lower one, which is very white. So that's a good use of it. You have the people who are up there on that middle ledge. I don't know if, and it does give it some scale, but because they're white, they make you look at them. And that may have been the photographer's intent. If you don't want us to look at the people, you can take them out. But it's a lovely image of the waterfall.
Next up is Untitled, Phil Olivo.
This is a nice portrait of this flower with an interesting curve to the stem, very attractive curve. I think here the background wasn't your friend. There's a lot of bright areas that are distracting from it. And in this case, it may have been that it would be better in color, so that the color of the blossoms would pull you away from the light areas in the back. Or you could try, I'm assuming it was done in color, and you did the black and white on the layer, then to perhaps paint in, or in other words, paint away the black and white treatment on the petals, then you'll have colored flowers on a black and white background.
Next up is No Gas for You, Phil Olivo.
We forget what these old gas stations look like, right? This is telling a story. It certainly does tell a story, because you see the weeds growing up and the dilapidated pumps and the sign, which has seen its better days. So it is telling a good story there of this old gas station. I wish we could see a little bit into the station or the garages behind there to bring some of the detail. There is detail there. It'd be nice to see just a little bit more of it, which would help to tell the story of the disrepair of this location. And I think if you darken down what's left of the concrete and the grasses around the pumps, it would draw more attention to the pumps as well.
Okay, next is Harley, Rich Schreibstein.
So, street scenes, you either see the people looking at you or you don't, in this case, the dog. So here we have the dog looking straight at the photographer. The photographer's gotten down low, almost to head high with the dog. So that gives a good sense there. I think the feet in the upper right-hand corner tell you it's a street scene, but I think they kind of detract because they pull you up to that upper corner, but you want us to look at the dog. You may want to lighten up the dog's face just a little bit to have more contrast and keep us focused there, as opposed to on the concrete or the gentleman or person to the left.
All right, honorable mentions. What? First up, Beekman Wall, Kim Koza.
Now, this is interesting. You know, it's a lovely abstract because it's identifiable objects in a random pattern. And it makes you look at it a long time because of that diversity, but uniformity in the coloring.
And our next honorable mention is Muster, Doug Mitchell.
This is a good period piece, and I put that in quotes, and a good angle. The photographer did a great job of being able to see the faces of these 5 soldiers. You've got the drum, you've got a lot of detail in the drum and their uniforms, etc. The lighting is very nice. I would suggest if you want to give it an even more period look, maybe doing a little tinting of it to give it that you know, old tintype kind of feel. Nicely done.
Okay, and our winners in 5th place, Flowers and Shadow, Linda Tomasula.
So this is a very stark black and white. The composition is interesting in that the image is divided completely in half, light and dark. But you can see all the detail in the jar, in the flower, etc. on the left, and you get just the shadow on the right. It really makes you think, and it, you know, because it seems to be unbalanced, it makes it interesting.
In 4th place, Intense Concentration, Bill Lanahan.
This is an excellent capture of a moment. Notice the eyes, and as the title says, intense concentration of the driver here. And they talk about getting down low. So you're actually probably below eyesight on this one. And then the treatment to make it look more like a wood carving or a pen and ink kind of drawing, which gives it kind of a rough feel as you expect with a motorcycle race. Nicely done.
3rd place, Canada Goose, Joe Catronio.
This is an excellent example of toning. The goose is tack sharp. It's doing something interesting. You can see all of its feathers. It's obvious it's standing in water, but we don't need to see that really. But notice the vignetting is bright. It's lighter than the area around the bird. And that gives it that kind of foggy or ethereal feeling. You know, too often we think of a vignette as something darker, but you can be very effective with a lighter vignette. And this is an excellent example of that.
2nd place, Dandelion Puff, Joe Catronio.
Another example of that lightness. This one is very ethereal. And you've got just enough darkness along the bottom to get a grounding, if you will, of the rest of the dandelion. And the fact that the puffy parts kind of fade into the background and into nothingness really gives it a light feel. The mood here is very, very nice.
And our 1st place winner, Candelabra, Claudia Jakubowski.
This is an excellent image on many levels. Technically, you know, it's tack sharp. The contrast in this between the light and the dark is stark. You've got great detail in the flowers, in the candelabra itself. The reflection is very well held. and notice the angle. So now we're below the cantilever looking up. You don't usually think about it that way, but it's a very, very well thought out and executed image.
Congratulations to all our winners, great images, and I want to thank Cynthia
Thank you.
for
It's
time.
always a pleasure to see y'all's images, and as I said, they were all wonderful. It's hard to find anything to say to make them better. It's wonderful.
Does anybody have any questions or comments for Cynthia?
Great job judging, Cynthia. We appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me to see your images.
I agree. I mean, the critiques and suggestions were really, really excellent and very helpful.
Yeah.
I have a fascination with Barbies, I think.
Did you pose those like that, Sean, or did you
Oh,
find
no,
them?
that's how I came across them.
You found them that way. Wow.
At my stepson's 6-year-old, that's how she left them in the yard. I took a picture of my iPhone 13 knowing it.
John, you may not be better off not telling too many people that you had that fascination.
Yeah, right? Anything else, anybody? Well, that's it. We'll see everybody next week. And again, thank you, Cynthia. It was much appreciated.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Good night,
Thank you, Cynthia.
good night, everybody.
Buddy.
Bye.
Thanks so much.